L-E capital R-O-Y Johnson, at LeRoy Johnson, and I'm from Harold, South Dakota.
Great. When were you born and where were you born?
I was born on 6th, 25th of 1932, and I was born in Pierpont, South Dakota.
Great. And can you talk about your family at the time?
I have, well, there was 8 of us children in the family, and my mother and dad were Anna Johnson and Luther Johnson is my father and mother. And my brothers, I had, my oldest brother was John Johnson, and my oldest sister was Clarice, Larson, a married name, and Arlene Sandby, her married name, and Margie Lickness, her married name, and then Ansel Johnson, my second oldest brother, and then I was the next one in line, LeRoy Johnson, and then it was Luther Curdy Johnson, and then Alan Johnson. That's the last one. So that's 8 of them.
Great. How was it growing up in a big family like that?
Well, we were pretty busy, and we didn't have a lot. Back in the 30s, it was pretty tough. It was dry, and we really had pretty tough going there for quite a while. And at that time, of course, everything we done was with horses and all the machinery that horses would work with, plowing, disking, hauling hay, whatever. We used horses all the time, and we had about anywhere from 8 to 10 horses all the time, so that we took and used them for farming.
I'm sorry, I'm going to take this from you. Just because I don't want it to get in the
Okay.
sounds, I'll give it right back.
Yep.
Okay. So did you, okay. So did you graduate high school?
Yes.
And where did you graduate?
In Langford, South Dakota,
And when did you graduate?
1950.
Great. So,
And then I worked around there. We moved into town from the farm in 1948, and then we lived in town there. And then when I wasn't in school, I was working for local farmers all around the country. I knew just about everybody in Langford.
so when did you draft or were you enlisted?
I enlisted in 1951. I was going to wait, and then my buddies talked me into going in the Navy, so I said, okay, we'll go. When I was in boot training, I got my call to go into the service, to be drafted anyway, and I just told them I'd been had already.
Where did you get basic military training?
Great Lakes, Illinois. Yep.
And when was this?
This would have been 1951, August, I started. Yep. 27th is when I enlisted. Yep.
So when did they tell you that you were going to go to Korea?
They didn't tell me right away. They didn't tell me till I got aboard ship. That was after boot camp. And then when I got aboard the ship, well, then they said, well, we're on our way to Korea in about a month, they said, so.
Well, did you know where Korea was?
No, I didn't know. I hadn't been out of I hadn't been out of the States,
Did you ever hear about it before?
Oh, yeah.
Where did you hear about it?
Well, from the news and everything, I heard about it and everything. And then when I was in boot camp, they were talking about it a lot, like company commander and stuff. So, and they told us we had to take and be prepared to go aboard ship.
So where did you arrive in Korea and when?
We arrived in Korea. See, I couldn't exactly tell you the exact date. It was been about February of '52. That's when we got into Korea. And then what we would do is we'd operate with aircraft carriers as plane guard, and then after that we'd have so many weeks of that, and then we'd go to Wonsan Harbor, Korea, and bombard and make our tour around there and help the Army with their gun emplacements and everything like that.
What unit were you a part of?
Well, I was in the division. Our division was, we had 8 ships. We operated with 4 of them. 4 ships that were in our division that we operated all the time with. And that was the USS Bowl and the USS Buck and the USS Thomason and the USS Lofberg. That's the one I was on.
great. And your specialty was?
Torpedo man.
Oh.
I was in gunnery, yes.
And what was it like?
Well, you had aboard a small, it's a small destroyer is what it is. And you have to know how to do every job. And I worked with the 40 millimeter, the torpedoes, depth charges, hedgehogs, and then I learned how to shoot the 5-inch guns. And then besides that, I used to have to be the helmsman of the ship. And I did just about everything on the ship except engineer and sonar. That's the only 2 jobs I didn't do in the board ship. Otherwise, I did every one of them. Yep.
Wow. And did you learn how to do all those jobs when you were in basic, or did they teach you when you got on the ship?
When I got in ship, that's when we had to learn everything. And you had to do this because in case somebody got killed or something, you'd have to take their place. And so that's why we learned everything. Yep.
Were you ever attacked when you were on ship?
Well, yes, we were fired at quite a few different times because we were only 1,000 yards off the shore. And the gun emplacements would follow us. We could see them following us all the time. And as soon as you stopped, or if you got very closer than 1,000 yards, then they'd try and fire at us. But we were lucky we never got hit. We had a lot of shrapnel aboard ship, but we never got hit, never got any damage. We had a sister ship that was damaged, and what he did, he stopped just for a couple of seconds, and he got shelled. It was just above the water line on the ship, and it blew a hole in 6 feet in diameter, and it killed 13 sailors and wounded. It was 17 altogether. They wounded the other 4. Yep.
So did you participate in any of the battles on ship?
Yes.
Which ones?
Well, we didn't really have any battles. What we would fire whenever we got fired on, we'd be firing it back. And we were right there in Wonsan. They said that Wonsan Harbor was the most shelled harbor in any world war. That's what they said. And we would be fired on, at least once or twice a day, and sometimes more than that. Yes. So we would, and then we'd just fire back as much as we could, and we would really shoot as many shells as we could, too. The 5-inch was only shooting about 20 per minute, and we would try and get at least 18 or 20 of them every minute we could. Because in the 40 millimeter, we most generally could shoot 60 rounds a minute. And we didn't use the 40s much because most generally the emplacements were right. The 40s weren't far enough, but they couldn't shoot far enough, so we would shoot. But we did use 40s a lot too. And when we were out of Wonsan on plane guard, we had a Russian sub that was trying to get into the carriers, and so we chased that sub for 2 days, but we never did catch it. They're pretty sneaky, but we shot a lot of depth charges, a lot of stuff. We never did shoot a torpedo because we had too many ships in the area around there, so we didn't dare shoot a torpedo. Yep.
Now, how did you feel when you were being shelled and when you had to try and catch these Russian submarines?
Well, I guess you don't think of things when you're in firing. The reason you don't shoot, you're too busy, and you just don't think of things like that. I was going from the depth charges to the hedgehogs, and I was the only one firing them, and then the rest of them were on guns. But the most generally the guns weren't firing because the subs are underneath the water, and so we were shooting depth charges and hedgehogs, and I kept pretty busy that way. Yeah, and you don't think much about when you're being fired on or anything because you know that's what they're going to do. They're going to fire back, or we're going to have to fire back, one of the two. And when you're fired on, well, you just keep on going and you don't think too much of it.
Did you interact much with South Koreans or any civilians while you were
Yes,
over?
we did. And well, what we did a lot, we went in quite a few different times, and we were in Wonsan Harbor bombarding. At night, we'd sneak in and then pick up prisoners, and then we'd go to and meet the army that was in there and pick up the prisoners and stuff. And it would be, they were being fired on quite a few times, you know, there, but then you couldn't use no lights at night, you know, so.
So what did you do with the prisoners that you picked up?
We took them aboard, and then after, when we got somebody to relieve us in Wonsan Harbor, then we took them out to the carrier, and after we took them out to the carrier, then we went back in to Wonsan Harbor again, yep.
And these prisoners were mostly...
They were Chinese, and we didn't have any Russian prisoners, but we did fire on a lot of Russian prisoners, or army, when we were, you know, going in the harbor, you know, driving around the harbor and stuff. And when we were going in the harbor there, and then once in a while I was up on lookout. They'd relieve me from the gun and send me up to drive the ship or helmsman, and then you'd see the Russians coming down on the beach, and then we'd report that. If it was too far away for us to shoot at, well, then our jets would come in there and they'd fire at them, and they were pretty accurate.
Do you think that the U.S.'s technology was better than the Russians or the Chinese?
No, not at that time. The Russians had us beat in submarines. At that time they did. And later on, I guess after I got out, well, then they improved a lot more. But before 55, well, they were pretty much ahead of us in submarines.
So how could you compete with them? How did you stay?
We did the best we can with what equipment we had, with sonar and everything, you know, and that's how we took and followed the subs. And it was pretty hard because they had better, and they could take and go down below our signals so that they could lay, and we probably went right over them. I don't know, you know, we couldn't tell. But our signals wasn't great enough to take and pick up everything, and so they were a little bit quicker and better than we were at that time. Yeah.
So how did the Korea that you had heard about on the news compare to the Korea that you saw when you were over?
Well, what I heard, it was a lot different. I thought, you know, it was pretty much not that many hills and all that, but there's a lot of hills in Korea, and the gun emplacements that we were shooting at would be in tunnels, and so you could shoot them out one day, and the next day they'd be back out there working against you again, firing at you, because they were pretty smart. They backed up into the tunnels when we were firing at them, and we'd sometimes enclose it, you know, we'd shoot all of it, so plug the tunnel up. But then by morning or the next afternoon, well, they'd back out there shooting again. So we never could control it really, you know. But they fired whenever they got a chance. They'd fire at us.
Do you recall where on the peninsula you visited?
We never went inshore. We never went ashore at all, except, well, just in Wonsan when we were picking up the prisoners. That's the only ones we went in, and we had landing parties that we went in and picked up the prisoners. And then after that, but other than that, we never got to go on shore. Never. We would be there for probably 67 to 70 days at a time. We'd be at sea, and then we'd go in for probably 2 or 3 days. Rest and recreation is what they used to call it. And so then we'd go in, and we would take and really celebrate then and really enjoy ourselves then. And they had enlisted men's club in Yokosuka, Japan and stuff, you know, in places, so that's where we went a lot when we come back into shore.
Do you know if you went all around the coast of the peninsula, or were you mainly in one section?
We went all the way around on the southern, you know, what they call it, the 38th parallel. we were all along, we covered pretty much the whole area around Korea. Yep.
Under the 38th parallel.
Yep. Hmm.
So you never went into North Korean waters.
No, we were right on the border of the 38th parallel. And what we did, there was a couple times that the French were in there. And then they went into a different harbor. And we would sit out and watch so that there wasn't any Russian MiGs coming in to fight against them, you know, or attack them. And we'd watch, then we probably would do that once every so often. But that was just once a month or maybe something like that, whenever they went in on special occasions.
And did you ever get seasick?
Yes, I did. I got seasick just about the first 2 years I was aboard ship. And every time I went out, I'd get seasick, and then I'd get over it. Finally, I started taking them seasick pills, you know, you take, and that helped. But after 2 years, then I finally got used to it, and then it didn't bother me. But there was guys that was so sick that when we went out to sea, we had a couple of small guys. One guy, a little Mexican, good little buddy of mine, he got so sick that we had to bring him crackers to keep him alive and water to keep him alive to get into the next port, because he couldn't take it. He just couldn't take it. And after 6 months, and the captain decided that he better take it, transfer him to shore. And so he did. He transferred him to shore duty, you know. And so when he had shore duty, well then he felt a lot better. But there was 2 guys during the 4 years I was in aboard ship that was transferred to shore duty. Yeah.
And what was the living condition on the boats otherwise?
Well, the first 2 years, the living conditions wasn't that great, because all we had most generally was chop suey and rice and stew. That's what we lived on, and everything, of course, like all your milk and all the eggs and everything was all powdered. Everything was powdered except, the potatoes were even powdered too, you know. And so we didn't have the food wasn't that great. I mostly would lose anywhere between 20 and 30 pounds every time I went overseas. Then when I got back to the States, well then we'd hog up and really eat then and gain about 20 pounds and then back overseas again. I was overseas there 4 times. I made 4 trips over to Korea. Yep.
And when you went back to the States, where did you stop for rest?
San Diego was supposed to be our home port, and then what we used to do is go to San Francisco, and then there's a Mare Island, I think that's what they called it, and there's one island up there that we used to have a shipyard up there, and then we'd repair the ship and get improvements on the ship when we come back, and that would be about 6 weeks, and then after that we'd go back out and start training and then head back overseas. Yep.
So did you send letters home to your family?
Oh yeah, I wrote quite a bit, but when we were in Korea, we didn't get mail more than once a month. Yeah, and then we sent out mail whenever we could, and whenever we got alongside of, or if we had a helicopter to come and picked it up, you know, from the carriers. But other than that, most generally our mail would be shipped probably every 2 weeks, something like that. We'd be in the harbor for 2 weeks probably, and then we'd go back out and then replenish, and then we'd send our mail to the carriers, and then we'd go back in and to Wonsan Harbor again.
So what did you say to them when you wrote?
Oh, you didn't dare say much, you know. You had to be careful of what you said, and you couldn't tell them about everything you were doing all the time, because you know that wouldn't be right, because then they'd be worrying too much. So you most generally just more or less explained everything is going fine, and we're doing this and that, and we'll probably be back in the States in 9 months or whatever, you know, and so we made them feel good. But we most generally get letters, probably mail was about once a month is when we got our mail, and then but the first 2 years I'd send money home so that my parents could send me a box of canned stuff over so we could have something to eat. Besides all that same food over and over, and all that powdered food.
Did they send it to you?
Yeah, they sent it to
What'd
me.
they send you?
Oh, they would send crackers, but most of the time crackers were all crushed. Then they'd send sardines and shrimp and all the canned stuff that could be sent, you know. And boy, we really enjoyed that. My buddies, we'd get together and we'd have a ball then.
Were you homesick often?
The only time I really got homesick was when I was in boot camp because, well, I wasn't so much homesick as my buddies. Some of my buddies hadn't been away from home. And so I most generally would talk to them and everything. And I did get lonesome, you know. You got lonesome because I hadn't been away from home very much. The only time I really was away from home was when I went south combining that was in 1950, before I went in the service. And then I was gone for probably about 3 months. But other than that, you know, I never was away from home much. I worked away right around Langford and Pierrepont area. Yep.
What do you think is the most difficult experience you had during your service?
I think the most difficult would be when we had our sister ship get hit. That was, then it kind of made you think of what was going on. And it made you think that, boy, you better be on the ball. And so then we'd work with them. And we got them towed out of the harbor when they got hit. And I think that was probably, of course, whenever you get fired on, you think a little bit, but it isn't, you're too busy at the time, so you don't really think too much then. But when you see something like that and then help them out, then you start thinking more. Now, I think that was probably my worst one, yeah. And then being seasick. That's not a good thing to happen, but, well, we did have one time when we were in Hong Kong for 3 days, you know, just rest and recreation. We got dysentery, and then that's a bad disease. That really, everybody got sick. And you really don't feel too great then. But other than that, well, I think towing their ship out and helping them out, that was probably my worst thoughts, I think, because otherwise I was too busy and I didn't think too much out, you know.
So you said you were there for four times. You went back to Korea.
Yep.
When did they tell you you were going to go home?
Well, when I was over there, the captain sent me over there with the ship the last time in '55, and I only had 3 months left to go. But he thought that I would ship over and re-enlist for another 4 years, but I fooled him. I didn't do that. At that time, it got so that I didn't want no more of it. I just said, that's enough. And when my 3 months were up, they had to ship me back to the States. And so then they took me into Yokosuka, and then from Yokosuka, Japan. Then they flew me out of there, and it took one day. Well, then we got into Midway, refueled, and then into Pearl Harbor. And it took 1 day to get back, flying. And 1 day it was 1 day to Hawaii, and then another 12 hours, I think it was, to get back to San Diego or San Francisco. Yep.
And this was when?
It was August of '55. Yep. Mm-hmm. And it took. Well, I got out. See, 1 day early, I think it was. Yeah. You know, I was supposed to get out the 28th, and I got out the 27th, I think it was. So I didn't get out early like some guys got out. The other ships, you know, their captain wouldn't take the guys over that was less than 3 months, because they knew they'd have to ship them back unless they re-enlisted. Well, most of the guys aboard our ship, they didn't re-enlist. We had a real good captain the first 2 years, and then after that, the replacement we had, he was a good captain, but he didn't know what the other one did, and he wasn't as sharp, and he was a different natured guy too. But we got along with him. We had to.
So-
But it was different. And then after they signed the peace treaty, then it got all pretty much regulations. So every day was a lot different. You didn't wear just dungarees and the work shirts. You had to wear whites or blues, all the time, and have them clean. So that's why I just said that's enough regulation. So I got out.
So when were you discharged from the military?
I was discharged August 27th, 1955. And then I had to do 4 years of inactive duty. And so I never really got my regular discharge till in 59. Yeah.
And what did you do during just inactive duty?
In inactive duty, then it's when I went to work, and I was working. I got married and then started raising a family. And then I worked in the post office for 4 years, and while I was down there in the post office, well, then I got my discharge down in St. Paul, Minnesota. Yeah.
Do you recall what thoughts you had as you left Korea? Did you have any hope for Korea in the future?
Oh, yeah, I was hoping that everything would turn out for the people themselves, because it wasn't, at that time, they were having a bad time. They were having a hard time, real hard time. The South Koreans were, and we knew that, and that's why we tried to take and do our best to help them out. And so there was a lot of, you got to thinking about a lot of that, and how good you really did have it, compared to some of them people. Because a lot of them people didn't have a good life, They were, well, fighting just to live, just to take and find something to eat and everything during the time that we were out over there, During the war, they were having a hard time.
What did you think was going to happen to them?
I really didn't know. I was hoping everything would turn out all right once they signed the peace treaty and everything got settled. Then I figured I hoped that they would get back to normal, and then get better living and everything else, to improve everything. And I guess it did, from what I found out later on, but it took quite a while before they ever got straightened out. Yeah.
Right. Have you been back to Korea since?
No, I haven't. I'd love to go over there, but I guess the way things are now, with retirement and everything, and a guy don't make that much in Social Security anymore, And I didn't have a lot paid in. Well, I had quite a bit paid in, but I didn't have the last 5 years before I started drawing Social Security. I had a low income, so that's what they gauged me on. So my Social Security isn't that great.
Well, have you heard of the Revisit program? Do you happen to know about the Korean government's Revisit program?
No, I haven't.
It's they bring veterans in. They cover everything except for half of the airfare. So the veteran pays half the airfare, but everything else, like hotels, meals, transportation, for 10 days is all covered, and it's in a way to thank the veterans for their service. But they have that program, so I can let you know more about that after the interview. But there is that program if you want to go back.
Yeah, I'd like to go over there and visit. That'd be something. Yeah.
So you know that Korea now is the 11th largest economy in the world. Do you know that?
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know how great they were doing, but I knew they were doing a lot better, but I never did know for sure how good they were doing.
Oh yeah, now you already talked about Kia, but electronics, Samsung as well, they're doing amazing. How does it make you feel that what you did contributed to such a transformative outcome in Korea?
Oh, it makes me feel pretty good, Yeah, it does. All the time I was there, you never thought too much of it. You thought about helping them and everything, but I mean, you had too much on your mind. But at the last 2 years after the peace treaty, and I got to knowing more about it, then I was just hoping that everything would turn out, and I was just wondering how good they'd do, afterwards. And once everything was calmed down, and I was hoping that they would do real good.
Are you proud of your service?
Oh, yes.
Would you go again if you had to?
Oh, yeah. If I had to, I would. Of course, right now, at my age, I probably wouldn't be. They probably wouldn't want me, but, I was thinking about it, I thought, boy, if I know if they ever called me, I'd go back, yeah. And I think I could take and do pretty good with my health the way it is yet, you know. I'm still doing pretty good.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great. What do you think is the outcome of your service in Korea?
Well, I think we tried to do the best we could, and I think it come out pretty good. I've thought of it a lot of times. I don't know if I'd want to go through it again, but then if I had to, I would, you know. And the outcome, I think, I learned a lot, and learned a lot about different people, you know, because we were in Japan and China and in Okinawa and what's the name of all the islands we went to. See quite a few islands, Midway, and then the one island that's has trouble with Japan now. What was it? That I forget now. There's one island, we were in a couple other islands. And then we were in Japan, I was in about 4 different places. And then we were in the Philippines too. Yep, we were in the Philippines. Yep. Yep. But other than that, I learned a lot, and I really think that them people have been doing really great. I do. I think they've learned a lot, and they're really up on their electronics and everything, you know. They're doing real good, I think, you know. Yep.
That's all because of what you did, so thank you. Do you have any other message that you would like to leave, perhaps with the younger generation?
Well, one thing that I think that they should know is that never think you're better than anybody else, you know, but never think anybody else is better than you. And I think that, but always do your best and try and help as much as you can, which is a lot of people now. I think my feelings is everybody thinks they owe them something. Nobody owes nobody nothing. You got to work for it. And so I think that's one thing you got to do is realize that you can't expect everything given to you. You got to take and work for whatever you get.
Well, thank you so much for your service, and thank you so much for being here with this interview. I had a great time.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Yep.